So thank you, everyone, and welcome to our second panel. We had a very good panel earlier on this morning. For those of you who are here, I believe you would agree with me. For those of you who are not here for the first panel, well, you're welcome for the second one, and I'm sure that you're going to have a good time with our second panel this morning. It's still morning, I believe. So anyhow, our second panel is on fintech and data analytics. Now, I'm sure that a lot of us, we've heard about fintech. It's been one of the most popular things in recent times. So we are combining that with data analytics, and we have a very good panel of experts here. I'm not going to introduce them, but I will talk about the moderator, and then the moderator will introduce the members of the panel. The moderator for the Fintech and Data Analytics panel is Felipe Cortes. Felipe is an associate teaching professor in the finance group. He is also the director of the Fintech Initiative here in the Damar-Mokin School of Business. If you do not know, we have a lot of activities, a lot of things going on around fintech in the curriculum, student clubs, faculty research, industry connections, and Felipe is the one leading all of that and organizing it and making sure that we are making impact on that in the university and across the world. Felipe himself, of course, does research in banking and finance and also corporate cash holdings. I know some of the news that we've had in recent times have made that to be even much more significant, because you see all of these companies with a lot of money in different banks and you're wondering what happens. So, well, Felipe studied some of those issues. So Felipe has also published his work in management science and Journal of Financial Intermediation. Those are some of our top journals in the field. And it's my pleasure to welcome Felipe to the podium, and then you can introduce your people. Thank you, Felipe.
So thank you, everyone, for attending, and welcome to the second panel of the day. So as Bunmi said, today's panel will be about fintech and data analytics. The plan for today is to present the speakers and then let them have some minutes to present the research and then open the room for Q&A. As Bunmi said, my name is Felipe Cortes. I'm an associate teaching professor of finance. I'm also the faculty director of the Fintech Initiative. My research started in empirical corporate finance, but over the last years, it slowly moved towards more of, I would say, fintech related. So working on DeFi platforms, like how blockchain allows these lending platforms to exchange money and where the incentives are. I also teach two courses as part of the fintech concentration. I teach the course on blockchain application in finance and a newly developed course on algorithmic trading. So today's session is about fintech. So what is fintech? Fintech is somewhat sometimes a vaguely defined term, but fintech refers to the use of new technology in the provision of financial services. So examples are, for example, making payments faster, more user-friendly in the banking sector, how to underwrite loans in a much more efficient and accurate way in the insurance business, how to verify claims in a faster way. In the realm of investments, we have the robo-trading, which is basically how to automate investment decisions, among others. Data analytics, on the other hand, refers to the process of obtaining data, cleaning it, and modeling it to uncover new trends to support decision-making. Examples of data analytics applications are, for example, the use of social media clicks to forecast revenue, the use of big data to make supply chains more resilient, or basically how to use big data to make marketing campaigns more effective, among others. So interestingly, and this is my take, these two fields, there is a lot of overlap, and in my view, fintech companies are becoming more and more one of the data feeds for data analytics. In the first wave of fintech, we have a bunch of users jumping into these applications. Now, the question is, what do these companies do with this amount of data? And for that, we have data analytics, and that's why I think they go together quite well. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. So you changed my orders. So we have here first with us Professor Nada Sanders. She's a distinguished professor of supply chain management. Professor Sanders is also a fellow in the Decision Science Institute, Board of Economic Advisors, and she's a member of the Association of Industry of Massachusetts. Professor Sanders is an international recognized expert in forecasting, predictive analytics, risk management, and supply chain management. Her research is on AI and analytics and how it is used across enterprises and their supply chains. Her research includes identifying best practices in forecasting, developing a corporate technology strategy, and creating resilient supply chains. Professor Sanders has held a range of leadership roles in both academic and professional organizations. She has served on executive boards. She has provided training and consulting to a range of Fortune 500 companies, including, just to name a few, Nike, AT&T, and Dell, among others. Next, we have Professor Karthik Krishnan. He's an associate professor of finance and CEO of MentorWorks. Professor Krishnan's research focuses on empirical corporate finance, financial intermediation, entrepreneurship, and corporate governance. Over the past years, his research has emphasized mostly on the economic impact of student debt. He also serves as the CEO of MentorWorks Education Capital, which is a fintech venture that provides income-based financing to students in higher education. They offer advanced certificates and professional training programs through income share agreements. Professor Krishnan, he also teaches in our FinTech concentration the course in Machine Learning in Finance. Next, we have Professor Koen Pauwels. I pronounce it right? Pauwels. He's a distinguished professor at Northeastern, and he's the co-director of the Data Initiative. After getting his tenure at the Dartmouth, Professor Pauwels helped build a startup at Özyeğin University in Istanbul. He was named a worldwide top % scientist. He has published over 80 articles on marketing efficiency. He has authored books awarded by both managers and academics. Some of them include Modeling Markets and Advanced Methods for Modeling Markets, awarded for researchers. And for practitioners is not the size of the data, it's how you use it. Smarter Marketing with Analytics and Dashboards. Thank you. Next, we have Professor Bart Yakov. He's an associate professor of marketing, co-founder and faculty director of the Digital Analytics, Technology and Automation Data Initiative. His research examines the implication of new technologies and business for model consumers. He has secured funding through multiple grants and published in leading marketing journals and management journals. Professor Yakov has co-authored a widely used digital textbook on sharing economy. And most recently, in collaboration with some of his colleagues at Northeastern, he has published a book on Break the Wall, Why and How to Democratize Digital in Your Business that analyzes the problems faced by business units and top management in the adoption of digital transformation. And next to Professor Yakov, we have Professor Nabil Gilani. He's an assistant professor of design and data analysis. He has a joint appointment between the Business School and the College of Arts, Media, and Design. Before graduating, he worked as a product manager and member of the analytics team at the Khan Academy, where he helped design learning experiences. Some of his current projects include the use of algorithms to help discover school assignment policies that foster diversity and inclusion, or the use of NLP, natural language processing methods, to enhance local government's responsiveness to feedback. So, thank you. These are our speakers. So, Nada, please, if you have.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody. My first comment is I wish I brought a copy of my book. Yakov has kind of beat me to it. So my work actually has evolved over the years, actually initially being really fairly narrow, looking at forecasting and supply chains. But over time, it has evolved, and I follow very, very closely what has happened with AI, technology, data, and how they drive organizations and help companies develop their entire ecosystems. We've been doing this ongoing research. We had a book that came out in 2019 called The Hue Machine, that the impetus of it was to go into companies and look at the great, marvelous things AI technology can do. But what we uncovered was really that the secret really stood with people, with the culture, the human, the talent. Mm-hmm. And so that this work has evolved in terms of merging human talent with technology. We are now updating. I'm in the process right now, literally in real time, gathering data, talking to SVP CEOs. And it's really interesting to me because what was right pre-COVID, when we gathered the data, what we are seeing now in this post-COVID era, while we talk about ChatGPT, and we talk about AI, and we talk about technology, and we talk about all this amazing stuff, every single CEO, every single SVP has said more than ever, it's the talent, it's the culture, and a new business model. So I think this is evolving in real time, and it's really important to understand. I think to this day, even now, companies think that technology and AI is something to acquire. It's a plug-and-play solution, right? Competitors are doing it. We have to get it. We have to have what they have. What they are missing is recognizing what is their unique competitive advantage. What is their business model? And how will they acquire, adopt, and adapt this AI in order to fit in with what they're trying to do? And that's really the work that I'm looking at right now, and I could talk a lot about it, but I will stop at this point and take questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Nana. Karthik, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me, folks. So my work, as Felipe said, started out with straight up, I would call plain vanilla corporate finance type stuff, morphed into entrepreneurship, and then went into student loans, how student loans can really kind of impact your life and things like that, which then motivated me. I don't know what I was thinking, but start a company. So now I find myself in a situation where I'm, an academic and a startup CEO. I also teach applied machine learning, so I kind of have a unusual perspective of kind of doing research, doing the teaching, and kind of implementing the stuff. And a lot of my work, the stuff we did in work as a startup CEO, you're kind of the janitor and you're the CEO and then you're running everything. I also did some machine learning stuff and implemented in our tech stack. That informed kind of how to think about why is this good, right? I remember the days when it was actually big data. When you were in a panel, people were talking about big data. Now they're talking about AI and machine learning because it's the same thing. It's really to take that data and kind of make sense out of it, right? So, and you're absolutely right now. The people, how they use that data is more important than the data itself.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I learned through my career very quickly. And so, kind of hiring folks who have both the business skills and the tech skills, and they are in the spectrum of those or combining those. Ideally, I want somebody in the top right quadrant of the business and the tech skills, but I'll never get that. I know that. Otherwise, I'm paying $200,000 for these guys. So it's something that I try to impress upon my students. Is you can't just do the analysis and good luck. You got to go to your CEO and say, this is worth something. What is this worth to me? Why is this going to make money for me? Or why is this a policy relevant thing? And the only other thing I'll say about a fintech is it's basically the way I think about fintech is that it is it is how the life cycle of a transaction intersects with technology. The pre-transaction stuff, the transaction stuff, and the post-transaction stuff. All of that, how that intersects with technology is my view on fintech. Again, I come from the lending space, but if I look at our partners, in the KYC space or our partners in the downstream servicing space, all of that is about how do we facilitate these transactions from beginning to end? How do we log the data? How do we log the compliance? Making that more and more effective and efficient. And believe me, the efficiencies are not there in the financial space even now. So there's a long way to go. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Karthik. Koen, please.
So a very similar story to the first two panelists. So I also started straight in my discipline of marketing. So I was right away trying to get all the data to quantify how much the senior managers should spend on product innovation, price, place, and promotion. And that was kind of the beginning of my career. And then I branched out into interdisciplinary work. A lot of that right now focuses on better business for a better world. So I kind of moved away for doing things that were mostly for-profit companies to doing things that serve society in a bigger way. And the two things that I wanted to talk about very briefly, and what the last one is going to transition to you, Jacob. The first one is that, so with some colleagues in finance and also in Europe and in Texas, we look at ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And that's very timely right now, very controversial also. And what we see in our data is that consumers and investors react very differently to the two. So consumers really like it when they see a company spending resources on environmental. activities and not on governance. That's very far away from them. Whereas we see institutional investors spending, or increasing the stock price of companies that spend more on governance, and actually be negative if you spend more on environmental activities. So that's a fascinating kind of conundrum that we're now researching. And also we see that differs a lot by whether you're in a very competitive market or not. So a lot of interesting kind of data insights there, and that there are some complexities and nuances. It's not all win-win, and it's not that you always do well by doing good, which was kind of the old, maybe a bit more naive point of view. The other thing is that we teamed up with a professor in organizational behavior here to write this book about how to democratize data and digital in your business. Because what we have seen, and all the way from the time that I wrote the first book, right? It's not the size of the data, it's how you use it. Back in 2010, when big data became big, we see time and time again that digital information sees some key successes, but also failures. And so we interviewed several people from companies like Wayfair, like Google, and also AI Ethics here, to come up with, well, what is really needed for this to succeed? And a lot of this has to do with, the kind of people you hire, how do you get them to work together, and how you really have the whole organization participate in being data-driven, and that everybody also see the rewards in their personal career and their personal satisfaction. So let me stop here and give it to the next panelist.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Kun, for
Jakob.
talking about some of our joint work. And the path, in terms of my research career, has been a bit similar to what we've heard before. So I started out focusing on how technology, data, changes the way for marketing managers to do business. So when I was coming out of PhD, transitioning into my career, mobile applications has been capturing a lot of attention. Managers try to understand, okay, if we do advertising on mobile devices, what works, what doesn't. Social media has been becoming quite prevalent, so one of my projects look at how managers can figure out what is the right and wrong way to seed marketing campaign using word of mouth. Done a lot of work on platforms, looking into how firms should optimally manage it. One of these works was Professor Fernando Suarez, who was moderating the previous panel, looking at complementarities on the platform. But lately, I've been shifting my research into wider kind of applications. The data in business, the data in marketing can tell us wider implications for society. So for example, if one of my earlier projects was focused on how, say, city characteristic may affect in which cities it's more or less profitable for a particular platform, such as social coupons platform like Groupon to enter, one of my current projects look at how Airbnb penetration impacts the experiences of local residents. So, and similar, for example, and we discussed sustainability, one of the projects Professor Kun-Pauls already discussed. Another project look at the how can we leverage the data we have in marketing on new products, ingredients, and then how can we work with engineers to quantify impact on changes that are driven by public policy into how ingredients change and then how that translates into environment, using some environmental engineering tools as well. And finally, of course, as conversations about diversity and equity becomes important, we do have a lot to offer from marketing to that conversation as well, because most of things you see around you relate to advertising. And so in one of also joint project with Kun-Pauls, we're looking at how representation in TV advertising in terms of race has been changing over time, especially before and after increase in public attention to racial inequality to George Floyd. We see the changes across brands, but we also look at, does it matter? Do consumers react to different racial representation and advertisement? And finally, a really interesting project that we keep talking about and I have to mention is looking at differences in how much people in new economy are getting paid depending on the race. Specifically, we're looking at influencer marketing. The white-black wage gap is well documented in many sectors of labor economy. We look at influencer marketing and find a much more nuanced picture where firms overpaying black macro influencers during periods of high tension when public actually cares about it. So February is Black History Month, Juneteenth, and immediately after George Floyd's murder. So they're just some examples of things I currently work, and of course, happy to answer more questions as we move along.
Thank you. Thank you. Nabil, please.
Hi, everyone. My interest is in using tools from computation and design to try to foster pluralism, which is an inclusive response to diversity in society. And so a lot of my interest is in issues of segregation. So why do we tend to separate ourselves from people who are different from us? And we look at that both online and in the physical world. So online, we look at social media platforms, echo chambers, filter bubbles. What are some of the forces that lead us to kind of remain separate from each other, why we don't want to engage always with people who are different from us, who have different, more controversial views. But then really, how do we start to design scaffolds or tools that actually lead us to want to engage with that difference? So that's obviously a very challenging task, and I think this is something a lot of us probably feel when we're online. But one of the ideas we've been playing around with is this idea of creating more you are here maps for the internet. So if you think about, when you walk into a museum or a mall, you kind of go to that part of the museum that helps you orient where you are, right? You're like, okay, this is where I am, this is what's around me. You kind of get this bird's eye view of where you could go. But if you think about the internet, we all, I think mostly often have this very local view of the internet. We end up in our bubbles. We don't have that necessarily broader perspective. These tools, these platforms aren't designed necessarily to give us that broader perspective of what are some of the other ideas and places we could engage with. And so we try to design some tools in order to help people connect and be aware of those things, and then hope that leads to more connection. And so I think that's a pretty broad kind of research space, but a lot of opportunity for anybody who's interested in really thinking through how do we do that more effectively and what's the impact, right? Can we actually find ways to productively connect across difference? In the physical space, we do work on schools and really to try to look at how can digital tools help us foster more integration, reduce segregation, racial and economic segregation in schools. And so this is obviously a socially entrenched problem. Technology is not going to solve it on its own. But one of the things we've been playing with is taking algorithms from, if you look at political districting, so how kind of Congress or how others draw political districts, there's a kind of a deep literature from the operations research world around using some of those models to design kind of computational ways of drawing boundaries, right? So whether it's in the political districting world, we look at those applications in the school districting world. So the way school districts draw boundaries around neighborhoods determines which neighborhoods go to which schools. And so if you have residential segregation, you're going to have school segregation as well, depending on how those boundaries are drawn. So we've been kind of simulating different ways of drawing those boundaries to see how we might foster more integrated schools, and are now starting to work with some school districts to kind of apply these algorithms to their data, but really create sort of a community machine system around this, because you don't just want algorithms deciding policies, you want to really get the community's voice into the loop. And so the idea is sort of have these algorithms generate policies that the the community gives their feedback on, and then incorporate that back into the algorithmic generation process. So really kind of human or community in the loop AI, so to speak. And that has led us, I guess, to the last area, which is when you have all of this feedback people are producing, especially open-ended feedback, it can be really hard to kind of make sense of what everyone's saying, identify themes and topics and patterns. I think you see this in business, of course, as well. Parents in school systems are consumers in a certain sense. And so we're starting to develop some tools using the chat GPTs and other kind of large language models to see how we can summarize, large swaths of open-ended feedback, and also try to identify maybe some of the underrepresented voices that might get glossed over when you're kind of computing corpus level averages, right? That's one of the things that's unclear, I think, with a lot of these models, is if you use them for summarization or use them for aggregation, what do they forget to include in those summaries and those aggregations? And so I'm working with a bunch of colleagues just around how do we actually start to evaluate how good these tools are in those sort of high stakes decision-making settings, and if they're not that good, can we make them better?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, every one of you. So now we open the room for Q&A, if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, please.
My interest is in fintech, as you know, Felipe. I've talked to you about this.
Mm-hmm.
And, fintech started off as a way to disrupt traditional finance, to do away with hierarchy and to become more decentralized and, of course, lower costs and so forth. But at the same time, you've had some major blow-ups in the world of DeFi. Terra Luna, for example, is one, but more recently the whole FTX blow up and Binance in trouble. But that's not to say that traditional finance is also not in trouble. Just the last week, Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank and so on. So my question to you, and to actually any of the other panelists who are interested in this issue of data and how it might play out in providing better services, more efficient and lower cost and better services, is what has gone wrong? And where is the solution? Is it primarily that you need more honest people? Or is it that you need better regulation? Because I know that Gensler at SEC has been beating a drum for quite some time about, hey, we need more regulation. These people are totally Wild West, out of control, and we need to provide better protection for investors and for society at large. So that's my basic way.
Okay, so let me give my take in 2 minutes, and then I will defer to the panel. So the issue with, for example, FTX was a contradiction, because the whole point of this DeFi, it has to be decentralized, but FTX, if you realize, was a centralization. Binance, the same thing. So it's not the issue with the DeFi technology, is that we go back to the same issue that we wanted to tackle in the first place, which is this like centralization. And the second thing is there is regulation. So you have apps that basically they have been surviving this like crypto winter, if you want, and they are purely decentralized, no? And if it's fully decentralized, then you have the money, you know where the money is, yes? But when you start adding this layer of centralization, like this top management, like this accounting that is shaded in the Bahamas, that's where the problem is, in my view, no? So, like, I'm not a purist on blockchain, but I'm kind of leaning toward, which is like there is still a lot of appealingness in that technology. But let me defer to the panel, please.
Well, I can comment. I'm not a fintech expert, but I think what I've said, and I think what was echoed throughout the panel, there were two elements that I think are really, really important. It's the talent and people. And what does that mean? It means there's an emotional response. And you see this with the markets, you see it with the financial sector. And it's really amazing to me when I watch decisions in the economy overall, how emotional, how responsive and very short-sighted they tend to be. And I've seen that with the economy, with the markets, where do we stand and so forth. And then the other aspect, we've heard a lot about data. And my background started in forecasting, and even before big data, one of my pet peeves was dirty data. I think we have so much data now, and so much of it is not accurate. So I think when you couple a lot of data, a lot of misguided, biased data, and you couple that, I think, with emotions of various actors, I think you end up kind of getting this perfect mix with some of the kinds of things that you're talking about.
So I can speak to your point about how does fintech kind of play a role in all the craziness in the market, right? My view on this is the fundamental rules of economics and finance don't really change. They're pretty constant, right? So it's like changing laws of physics. Mm-hmm. You don't change that stuff because you're using technology. It's an asset has to have value, underlying value, and that's why it's valued at something. If you have, duration mismatch in your assets and liabilities, you're going to get your butt kicked, right? So those are fundamentals. What fintech does not do is protect you from stupid. Right? What fintech does do, however, is it provides a layer of efficiency, because even a transaction as simple as a buy and a sell can immediately get really complicated when you implement this stuff, right? So I think they're relatively orthogonal in terms of like, well, did fintech cause problems, or did the implementation of certain types of logic cause the problems? And that's my view. Is more like, hey, look, if you have fundamental disagreement from the basic way that interest rates are affecting your bond portfolio, it's going to come back to bite you, right? So that's one. On the regulatory side, for me personally, it's a very complex issue, and it's for this reason. Yes, I think the fact that interest rates are going up, the fact that some of these banks are concentrated in venture or crypto, whatever, real estate, whatever it is, you want to look at what the beta of those deposits, interest rates are, and how those asset values change, and what is the duration, right? So that's something that I would think that is fundamental and critical. Not sure what happened in these banks. I also think, conversely, as a CEO of a startup, that you can also regulate in such a way that you can actually reduce competition. This is a broader point, which is like, I can't afford the lawyers that these big companies can. So you put more regulation on me, I'm going out of business and people can't come in, right? But these big companies can. So the minute I become a big company, I'm going to bring the regulations. Thank you. And so I think that this is not a simple topic from a regulatory perspective, but technology does not mean, fintech does not mean you can ignore the basic fundamental rules. That's core. And what you have seen happen time and again is, hey, asset value doesn't correspond to what you thought it was. That's it, right?
I just want to echo kind of both what Karthik and others said, right? So on the fundamental rules of business that they don't change, right? And this is almost back to the future. So when I came to the States, I was in LA right in the end of the 90s with the first .com boom. And there was a presentation about, making a mouse that would give off smell of perfume. Because they're like, well, you can online shop for things that are sound or visual based, but what if you go over a bottle of perfume and the mouse will give this out? So this was 1998, right? And I was just 27 years old, and I was the only one laughing out loud in the whole room. I'm like, no consumer will buy a mouse that gives out a smell. And everybody was like, you're too old to understand, right? And I get the same things last year when I was criticizing the metaverse, by the way, right? But so there's this feeling that everything is new, and kind of one of the things that we as academics do so well is knowing what has gone before and kind of putting these things in perspective. I also just want to kind of echo another thing, that a lot of these decisions are made with a lot of emotions. And so I find it pretty ironic in these days, by the way, that major companies that make their money from advertising and for a year have said to everybody, hey, you should not stop advertising in a recession, you should not lay off people, are now laying off so many people. It's a very emotional and kind of, rash decision based on the problems that I see.
Very reactive.
The final thing I was going to say about big data, so I have this really fun paper with no data whatsoever. So it's very readable, and it's basically saying that the 4 V's of big data do not solve any of these emotional problems because the biases can just multiply. So for instance, the more data you have, the more volume you have, the more confirmation bias plays a role. Because if I have a preset pet peeve, I can now more easily find it somewhere in the big data. So the more variety of data you have, the more you can cherry pick. And so we need, both kind of more accountability and also just more data literacy, part of which we're teaching to our students here at Northeastern to address that.
And I think it's really important to look at the consumer side, right, of fintech, because of course it's great that technologists open access to the market to everybody, and especially when we look at something like Robinhood, right, the popular mobile application on which we have millions of people now trading. I think when you think about where the future problems would arise, as Karthik mentioned, well, fintech doesn't protect from stupid. More broadly, fintech does not protect vulnerable population, does not protect people who are prone to gambling. I mean, we see it already in other areas of decision making. We see, for example, analyzing lottery data, that poor people who buy lottery ticket, the way they play lotteries, when they buy it, because jackpot varies over time, and how they play it, they typically pick numbers manually rather than picking automatically, results in small expected winnings, even if they do win jackpot. And when we look at the financial applications, of course, the emotionality plays into decision. And so people prone to gambling tendencies, they're really getting exploited by a lot of companies out there who make trading a fun experience because, well, it's only fun, until you lose the house, right? And so, unfortunately, this is where we probably need more regulation to protect the vulnerable populations, to make sure that the companies in capitalism that we live in wouldn't try to extract as much income as possible. And unfortunately, we see the opposite tendencies. So the recent changes in this state, allowing sports betting, I think that's one of the steps in the wrong direction, where you can quickly place bets online. And again, it's similar experience to Robinhood trading, and I think we do need more consumer protection for the future.
I know pretty much nothing about fintech. But I think, of course, I'll say something anyways. No, I think just one general thought, and just hearing some of the responses is something that I used to talk about with my old PhD advisor around just types of friction. So I think we live in whether we think about online systems, probably algorithmic trading, all of these sorts of different systems, there's kind of this drive towards minimizing friction as much as possible, right? Being able to have efficiencies, economies of scale, do things very quickly, et cetera. And it makes sense because there's cost-saving implications for that, profit implications. But I think it's interesting to think about, like, when is friction good, right? When should we actually design for friction? I mean, if we think about democracy, for example, it's a very frictionful system, right? And it has its own issues, but it sort of works because there's checks and balances, because there's a lot of different friction. And so one way to add friction is regulation, but I think another way to add friction is in products themselves, how you design products, right? When you think about Twitter, for example, I think they've played around. I don't know what Twitter's doing now. I think they're doing a lot of things, but I know in the past they've played around with things like, hey, before if they detect you're going to post something really toxic, and they'll prompt you and be like, are you sure you want to post this, right? And that's a little bit of friction. And yeah, it might hurt their bottom line in terms of engagement and, it's a volume of content, but the social good of that can be dramatic and it can have ripple effects. And so I think it's interesting to think about what are the small levers of friction or small kind of changes we can make in these systems, bringing communities and humans in the loop. What are these sort of small things that don't necessarily require systemic change in day one, but could be the seeds for some of those changes? What are those quick wins we can have, and how do we measure the ripple effects they might have?
Thank you. Really interesting panel. I don't know anything about finance. I did work for a central bank for the last 8 years. Still don't know anything about finance. I used to run a lot of programs in digital transformation for a lot of banks prior to joining Northeastern. And because I don't know anything about finance, one of the things that I learned is that in this process of digital transformation, it's not digital transformation that it's hard, it's people transformation that is hard. But I was very stimulated by your comment about being a CEO of a startup, and since I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, I would really want to know, what do you think some of the very large banks, the financial institutions that are still very traditional, very rigid, that they always refer back to regulations as the reason why they don't innovate. What is it that they can learn from startups, and what is it that they are still missing? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, we've had experience working with a bank, with a nationally chartered bank too. So I think banks fundamentally are wanting to do that. They really want to kind of customer experience is one issue. For example, it's a big deal for them. When in my class I asked students to raise their hands, how many of you have been in an ATM in the last 3 months? One guy, right? Like one kid. So definitely they want, from a customer experience perspective, they get it. They totally get it. I think they have some systematic hindrances that really prevent them from doing a lot of this stuff. Not the customer experience. So I'll give you an example, right? If you want to get a very fancy AI-based underwriting model that's going to give you really fancy analytics, first thing first hurdle you got to go through is the compliance department of a bank. And most of these AIs go there to die. Yeah. So, when you're trying to kind of do this, these guys have essentially their regulators overseeing them, saying, why are you doing this? Is this AI-based model somehow treating minorities differently, or old people differently? So there's this kind of concept of disparate treatment, and then do you have an AI-based model that's correlated with some of these other factors that are prohibited classes? It's called disparate impact. And so by the time you're done through that, you're like, forget it, I'm going back to FICO, right? So so there are these systematic hindrances that these banks have that they have to kind of overcome. More banks are doing that. More banks are getting there. I think where technology is really helping some of these banks, they're really willing to move forward, is, for the love of God, reduce my paperwork, or for the love of God, reduce my KYC headache, or managing the data. So where we see a lot more action, and some of these banks are taking steps. Even our partner bank has been taking steps. Literally, okay, these are the platforms. These are like, they were very happy when we implemented a automated AI-based KYC system. So we have to do customer identification check. You have to show your ID. You have to shake your head so you're a real person in your camera. Now you're good to go, right? Instead of us taking their ID, manually checking it, and all that stuff. That's really then helped them get their KYC reports. I think there's a related problem both in banking and beyond, which is as these tools become really effective, these tools are compensated for specializing and making a big difference in a particular space. So you see a very fragmented set of tools in KYC, in monitoring of your data, in underwriting systems and all that stuff. So now you have effective siloization of the data. So now you're talking about more API-based systems and more integration, more data warehousing. I can go on a rant for the whole day, but I hope I'm coming across. I think there's a definite desire on the part of banks to do a lot of that. I think they face some systemic challenges they're trying to overcome.
If I may have a quick follow-up on regulation, right? So I think some regulations are really ill-advised. So I think New York State has a law now that if you use AI for hiring, you have to show it's unbiased. And I'm like, no, the alternative is human hiring, which has so many biases. You should only happen to show that it's better than what you're replacing, right? And then compliance becomes, I think, much easier. And we have that a lot in also discussions with students. There's some very nice cases about algorithms and kind of what they do also for minorities and so forth. And that you can kind of improve on what is currently there, and that small steps may be much better than asking for the moon right away.
Yeah. And same point. We also we lend to these individuals income contingent loans, but we also help them to find jobs. And when you're kind of talking about AI-based rules, I get a heart attack right there because you got to deal with compliance here, you got to deal with compliance there. No, thank you. I don't want to deal with that anymore. So, my adoption of AI is very much driven by what are the frictions created by what am I being told to do, right? As this major CEO said, regulators are my judge, jury, and executioner, right? I don't want to deal with stuff that gets attention. So you're really worried about as a business, is this getting people's attention? So you try to sell these AI-based tools. By the way, if you're making AI-based software, maybe that's one of the first three questions. Okay, is somebody really going to look at this and go biased, or is your AI-based car going to hit somebody on the street? And so that's a challenge we have to overcome.
Well, thank you, Karthik. We have room for one quick question.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So I just had a question about, so you guys are all professors and faculty here at Northeastern, right? And so with kind of data analytics and AI, there's a major craze, especially with OpenAI releasing GPT-4, and every top company in the world is going crazy about implementing it. But specific to the education industry, how do you see AI, machine learning, all these new different tools that are being released? How do you see them being integrated into the education experience for students? And how do you think that's going to make an impact teaching-wise for you guys?
I'll try to answer that. So to me, it's another tool. I think we have to evolve with the tools, but that's really all it is. And I think as these tools evolve the way that we teach, we have to evolve as well. I think if we just assume that we're going to be teaching the same way that we taught last year and 5 years ago, we're not going to stay in business, right? And so we have to offer value to our students. That simply means we have other tools that we have to work with and incorporate that. And that also means that we have to, come up with different ways in terms of how we navigate the classroom. And so for me, I'm not really threatened by it at all. I'm just going to incorporate it.
So I have good news and bad news for all of us. The good news is there's going to be some enterprising entrepreneur who's going to solve all your grading problems. Yeah, there you go. So how many of you hate grading? Don't worry about it. The bad news is you're going to have to change the entire course now.
Yes.
Because guess what? Your answers are probably coming somewhere from an AI-based system now. And so I think we have to adapt to the reality that the world has changed, completely changed. You don't need, go to a website somebody can write your answer. Somebody can write an answer on ChatGPT now. So I think we have to now respond to this, and I think use this as an opportunity to evaluate our pedagogical approach My pedagogical approach, I can tell you, is, but mine's a very specific course. I don't teach basic corporate finance anymore. If I was teaching that, I'd be worried about it. Right now, in my class, if you're writing code that is on the internet, I'm going to fail you. Why didn't you take it from the internet? Why are you rewriting the code? Because that's the whole point of, like, you're not supposed to do more than you need to do to achieve the same goal, right? So again, maybe it's my head this changes as a CEO. I don't know, but I think we have to adapt to the reality that more and more this is going to be part of our lives, part of our students' life, and react to it. And I think there's a lot of positive that can come out of this, where people can get more creative. Since Google came, people were worried about, whoa, what is this going to do to our kind of learning systems, right? It helped, I think, in the end.
Well, thank you. I think
We can take
one more question.
As long as you guys don't take too long to answer.
Thank you. So I had a question. I'm also in the E&I group. With the demise of Silicon Valley Bank, there's a big impact on financing for startups because of the relationship between investors and venture capital investors. And having done some startups, Silicon Valley Bank was a very good ally. Is there anything that FinTech can do to bridge that gap now that's going to be absent with the demise of banks like Silicon Valley Bank?
I can go, I guess. I don't want to keep talking, but I think you will see some of these companies like Brex, who provide these corporate credit cards. What they were doing was pretty cool. They were actually giving you emergency lines of credit, while you were in this kind of situation. So I think there are certainly some solutions out there. But these kind of situations are really the worst for idea stage companies. Those guys are not going to survive this. This is no way.
Yeah, that's definitely, I see a lot more risk aversion in the business world in general. And so instead of like going after really new things, they want to become more efficient at what they're already doing. And that seems to be where the wind is blowing in general.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank the speakers and thank you for attending.